The UK's publishing industry is the #1 exporter of physical books in the world. Industry members suggest that this is to do with the global profile of the English language, as well as the reputation of the UK publishing industry. The latest figures from the United Nations International Trade Statistics database show that the UK had a 17% share of global physical book exports, the highest in the world, and closely followed by the US. In 2016, exports of children's books rose by 34%, in part due to greater demand from countries including India and China. So in light of the huge global demand for books published in the UK, plus the recent increase in UK children's book exports, I will discuss the unique issues that picture books face during the process of translation. I spoke to Jane McGuinness, an illustrator and author who won the Walker Prize in 2016 for her picture book Say Hi to Hedgehogs. Other books she has worked on include the Kew Children's Guide and the Usborne Nature Journal.
The thing is with picture books is they're so expensive to produce because obviously it's all full colour printing. And the UK is one of the best markets for it, but they will feel more confident if they can sell the rights to, for example, in about a month there's the Bologna Book Fair going to happen, and that's the only trade fair in the world that's just for children's publishing and children's media. And basically publishers, for example, Walker Books, they'll have a stand there and they will talk to publishers from Germany, from all the countries, France, China, everywhere basically, and they'll sell the rights to co-editions of the work. So, a German publisher might come in and buy the rights to, for example, my book, and then publish a German language version in Germany, and they would have the rights to do that, which they would have bought from my publisher essentially. But obviously if you've got a rhyming text, then the foreign language publisher, it's a bit of a harder job for them to translate, because if they're going to keep it rhyming, then they need to translate it to a different language.
Rhyming text in picture books is significant because it is stories in these that are frequently read aloud by adults for young children. This is an issue for translators because for them, it means that not only does the meaning of the text need to be translated accurately, and not only does the rhyme and rhythm need to work in their language, but they also have to consider how the words sound in the individual dialects that exist within their own country. Publishers may consider it too high a risk or costly to hire the right translator to meet these challenges, and therefore will be hesitant or unwilling. Some publishers will solve this issue by making it a rule not to accept rhyming text at all, or by heavily discouraging it. And others often handle this issue by publishing a non-rhyming version of the translated work. UK publishers are the first in line of gatekeepers to publishing work for the international market, and they will often have certain criteria when looking at whether or not to accept a work that contains rhyming text. Kate Wilson is the managing director of the award-winning children's book publisher Nosy Crow. Her policy contains 3 criteria that she uses when looking at whether or not to accept a rhyming text. The first is that it has to rhyme in many different English dialects, as typically many authors will write for received pronunciation based on Southern England. Originally from Edinburgh, she will try a Scottish accent and then make an attempt at others such as Irish, US and Australian accents to check if they also work. The second is clear scansion. This means that when reading aloud, it is not ambiguous which syllables to place the stress upon, which results in a good rhyming text, which is often overlooked. The third and arguably the most important is a strong story. She states that rhyme and rhythm need to be the engine that drives a really good plot. Sometimes text isn't even needed at all in order to tell a good story. Many successful wordless books exist, for example, The Arrival by Sean Tan, which relies solely on images. According to Writers and Artists, a subsidiary of Bloomsbury Publishing, a UK publisher would generally require world rights, which is the right to sell or sublicense the book worldwide. This is because the UK market is relatively small on its own, and therefore publishers need to finance full-colour printing, CMYK, which is especially the case for picture books. So the corporate strategy for UK publishers is to therefore manage their profits and losses over many different territories. Nosy Crow, for example, would own the rights to publish in Finnish, but don't do this themselves. Therefore, they would negotiate a deal with the foreign language publisher to publish the work in Finnish, so they will receive a percentage of the profit of every book sold. As Nosy Crow publishes children's books, over half of the books that they publish are in full colour, which makes it especially significant to be able to offset the costs. Kate Wilson states, "There are certain costs associated with printing a book, which are the same whether you print one copy or 100,000 copies, and it makes sense to spread those costs over as many books as possible. So the aim of the game is to say to the Finnish publisher that not only will you sell them the rights to publish the book in Finnish, but you will print the books for them in Finnish too." This makes perfect sense because the picture books in, for example, a picture book are printed first, and then the text of the picture book is printed on top of the pictures, so you can print a whole quantity of pictures and then put the UK text on a quarter of that quantity, the French text on a quarter of them, the German text on a quarter of them, and let's say the Finnish text on a quarter of them. Of course, the quantity doesn't divide into quarters because different language markers are different sizes. Germany is bigger than Finland, but you get the idea. Each version of the book is called a co-edition. But what about when illustrators handwrite the typography for their own book, and how is the issue of translation tackled? Oliver Jeffers' earlier work, such as How to Catch a Star, was frequently hand-lettered by himself, but this presented problems when translating it into other languages, so publishers would require that he do the hand-lettering for all the translated text, but as he did not speak many of the languages that the book was translated into, it was easy for mistakes such as spelling to occur. A way that publishers have dealt with this is by using digital type for practicality.
Marta Altez, who taught on our course, she's Spanish, and her books get quite a lot of co-editions and stuff. She'll do the title text, for example, for 3 or 4 different languages of her books. And it looks really great, but it's like loads more work for her. I think she pretty much does it voluntarily. I don't know.
The effect of typography is a subtle one, and it's often overlooked. To exemplify this point, let's look at an example by Tove Jansson, famous for her movement books. In one of her picture books, Who Will Comfort Toffel, Oitinen analyses how a seemingly tiny detail such as the shapes of letters can be considered a translation problem. In the original version, the words are written in cursive, with a handwritten feel. Oitinen states that this brings an element of closeness to the reading situation, and it also works in harmony with the paper cut technique used in the illustrations. In contrast, the English version uses ordinary typeface. The linearity of the text block in the English version is emphasised, therefore creating a separation between the words and the images. Oitinen argues that the detail of handwriting is more significant than it may seem. It's part of Tove Jansson's narrative style to counterpoint opposites, such as danger and safety, through the use of juxtaposing hard and soft lines, in this case the box image versus the soft cursive type. This unique relationship between text and image is lost in the English version. This example illustrates just one of the stylistic effects that a translator or publisher needs to consider when replacing handwritten type. However, as mentioned earlier, practicality is often prioritised and digital type is often used as a solution. The issues that have been discussed so far have focused on the sound and appearance of the text, specifically the rhyming and typography. But there is another element to translation which is specific to picture books, and that is the artwork and the illustrations. As Oitinen states in one of her journal articles at dbnl.org, cultural differences are always a central problem in translation. The original version of Christine Lelouis' book cover, I Know, shows a naked little boy running in the snow with a cap on his head, which is viewed as humorous by Finnish readers in context of the story. However, in the British version in 1987, the publisher Methuen asked Louis to draw a new cover with the boy fully clothed because it was considered indecent. In the context of growing abilities of image editing software, this process of altering artwork is made much easier to do. However, it is not possible a lot of the time to alter the images in books for international audiences due to the issue of co-printing. Publishers will therefore tend to choose books in which the illustrations and artwork can be easily travelled between countries. Tracy Phillips from Simon & Schuster says, in terms of the illustrations, elements that are very culturally specific, such as red pillar boxes or London black cabs for picture books from the UK, sometimes make the book tougher to sell, and featuring animals that are unfamiliar can be tricky too. For those books that do have culturally specific illustrations, it is an issue for translators. An example of this is shown in the book Jamila's Dress, which is set in a small village in South Africa. The story comes from several cultures and languages and is written in English. In one scene, an illustration shows Jamila and her mother playing a sing-song game in the morning and acting as if they were pouring tea. In order to create a believable translation for the Finnish audience, the song was replaced by a Finnish song that had the tune to Loo Loo Skip to My Loo. In Finnish, it is about what people do when they get out of bed. This is a fitting solution, as it is not an obscure Finnish song, but an international tune, and also the way the song is acted fits with the hand and body movements of the original illustrations. In addition to this, picture books by Mari Konis have many elements of Finnish tradition, landscapes and utensils embedded in them. In the opening pages of one of the books, a character is shown collecting birch twigs for the sauna. The twigs will form a vita, which is a bath whisk used by the Finnish. The verbal and visual narration doesn't tell the reader what the bath whisk is used for, so in order to understand what is going on, previous knowledge of the Finnish culture is required. Translators sometimes use footnotes to provide more information when translating literature, but for picture books this is not a typical convention. These examples illustrate the challenges which arise in translation due to some of the common features of picture books. These features include vocal aspects of rhyme and rhythm, the prominence of hand-drawn typography, and also the prominence of visual narrative. I have discussed how this impacts various members of the industry and how they have responded in practical, economical, and cultural contexts.